Chapter 1. They called her trash. The runt. The mistake. But tonight, the world would break for her. Corner the runt. Don't let her reach the edge. The command ripped through the freezing night air. Snapping jaws and the heavy thud of paws vibrated against the frozen earth. Zariel didn't look back. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt like lead. But she kept running. The jagged cliff of the abyssal rift loomed ahead, a gaping black maw in the earth that swallowed the moonlight. 3 massive wolves vaulted over a fallen pine, skidding to a halt just yards away from her. They bared their teeth, vicious snarls tearing from their throats. But as Zariel spun around, her back inches from the deadly drop, a strange thing happened. The wolves stopped. Their ears twitched. The murderous intent in their glowing eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden, involuntary hesitation. They whined, lowering their heads for a split second before shaking it off. No wolf could ever rush her without losing their rhythm. A tall man stepped through the tree line. Beta Silas. He wiped the dirt from his jaw, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Nowhere left to run, Zariel," Silas mocked, his voice dripping with venom. "Step away from the edge. Corvan wants you back in the cages." Zariel's chest heaved. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. Instead, she scooped a jagged stone from the frost-bitten earth and hurled it with everything she had. It cracked straight against the lead wolf's snout. The beast yelped, stumbling back. "Tell my former alpha he can rot," she spat. Silas's eyes flashed with pure anger. "You are Omega trash. You belong to the pack. He wants you begging on your knees, and he will get what he wants. Come here, now." He used his alpha command voice, expecting her to drop. She didn't even flinch. "I belong to no one. You step off that ledge, you die," Silas barked, stepping forward. Zariel looked at the pitch-black abyss below. She looked back at the chains they held. Better dead than his. Without another word, Zariel let herself fall backward. The wind screamed in her ears. The furious roars of Silas and the wolves faded into nothingness. The darkness swallowed her whole. It wasn't surrender. It was a refusal to be broken. She braced for the crushing impact, but it never came. Instead of jagged rocks, she crashed through something solid yet invisible. A loud crack echoed like breaking glass. Searing blue light exploded behind her eyelids. Her body hit a steep, smooth incline, sliding down until she was violently thrown onto a cold stone floor. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. She gasped, rolling onto her side. "So, the abyss spits back a pup." The voice did not come from the air. It reverberated inside her skull. Heavy, ancient, dying. Zariel dragged herself up. The cavern was massive, lit by glowing blue veins running through the rock. In the center of the chamber lay a beast of myth, a wolf 3 times the size of any normal alpha, its silver fur matted with age, its breathing a hollow rattle. "Who are you?" Zariel whispered, stepping back. "A forgotten king," the beast rumbled in her mind. Its massive golden eyes locked onto her. "And you smell of the old magic. You bleed weaver blood." "I'm just a rogue," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm nobody." "Lies," the beast rasped. "You are the ruin of false kings. You are the silence in the pack." The giant wolf struggled to lift its head. A blinding sphere of golden light materialized in the center of its chest, pulsing to the rhythm of a failing heart. "They hunt my power. They seek the alpha spark to rule the continent. I will not let a tyrant claim it." "I don't want it!" Zariel backed away, her instincts screaming. "You have no choice. The world is broken. Fix it." The beast slammed its massive paw onto the stone. The golden sphere shot forward like a lightning bolt. It slammed into Zariel's chest. She screamed. Fire flooded her veins. Her heart skipped a violent, unnatural beat. It felt like her ribs were physically snapping apart, reshaping to hold a power far too massive for her frail Omega frame. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest as her vision went white. The ancient king's head hit the stone. His breathing stopped. The cavern fell dead silent. Then, the ceiling exploded. A shockwave of pure, devastating force shattered the rock above. Boulders rained down, smashing into the glowing altar. Dust choked the air. Through the debris, a figure descended. He didn't land. He struck the ground like a meteor. The earth trembled beneath his boots. As the dust cleared, Zariel looked up through her blurred vision. He was a nightmare carved from muscle and shadow. His eyes burned with an unnatural, terrifying gold. The overwhelming aura radiating from him pressed down on Zariel's shoulders like a physical weight, screaming at her to submit. Fander. The ruthless King of Ironfang. He looked at the lifeless body of the ancient beast. Then, his lethal gaze slowly turned to Zariel. For half a second, just a fraction of a heartbeat, the king froze. Something in her scent, something buried underneath the blood and dirt, made his breath hitch. The absolute stillness in his chest faltered, but the anomaly vanished instantly, masked by cold, murderous fury. He saw the golden veins of the alpha spark fading under her skin. His jaw tightened. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. You took it. His voice was a low, fatal rumble that vibrated against her bones. Zariel forced herself to her feet. Her legs shook, but she refused to look away. I didn't ask for it. I tore through 3 mountains and slaughtered an army to reach this tomb, Vander said, taking a slow, predatory step forward. And I find a trembling rat swallowing my crown. It chose me. Magic doesn't choose trash. Vander's eyes narrowed. Spit it out, or I will carve it from your ribs. Try it, Zariel spat back, surprising herself with the venom in her tone. The alpha spark inside her flared, pushing back against his suffocating dominance. Vander didn't smile. He didn't hesitate. He moved faster than humanly possible. In a blink, he was in front of her. His hand shot out, fingers curled like talons, aiming straight for her chest. Driven by a newly awakened reflex, Zariel grabbed a jagged piece of crystal from the altar and slashed upward. Her strike met his incoming hand. The crystal sliced his palm. His claws grazed her forearm. Drops of crimson blood, his dark alpha blood and her luminous omega blood fell through the air. They hit the ancient stone altar at the exact same time. The cavern stopped breathing. The blue moss instantly turned a blinding, violent silver. What did you do? Vander growled, stepping back as the floor beneath them began to violently tremble. Nothing. Zariel panicked, clutching her bleeding arm. A deafening hum filled the room. From the blood-stained altar, a beam of pure, agonizing light erupted. It twisted and braided itself into a heavy, glowing chain. Before either of them could react, the chain shot forward. Clang. The left cuff snapped shut around Vander's wrist. Clang. The right cuff locked onto Zariel's wrist. The tether pulled taut with the force of a freight train. Vander was violently yanked forward. Zariel was ripped off her feet. They slammed into each other, stumbling hard against the cavern wall. Get this off me, Vander roared. His eyes blazed with fury as he grabbed the ethereal chain with his free hand, pulling with enough strength to rip a steel door off its hinges. The moment he pulled, a searing pain shot up Zariel's arm. She let out a sharp cry, her knees buckling, but the exact same flinch mirrored on Vander's face. He gasped, dropping the chain, looking at his wrist in absolute shock. The pain was synced. Touch it again, and I'll break your fingers. Zariel hissed through the pain, leaning heavily against the rock. Vander stared at her, sheer murderous disbelief masking his features. He, the King of Ironfang, tethered to a rogue Omega. Before he could utter a threat, a sharp whistling sound cut through the cavern. They both looked up. Through the shattered hole in the ceiling, thick ropes were dropping down into the dark. Dozens of shadows began sliding down the lines. Corvin's assassins had found the entrance. Vander looked at the descending killers. He looked at the glowing chain binding him to an Omega. Then, he looked dead into Zariel's eyes. If you slow me down, Vander whispered, his claws fully extending. I will use you as a shield. If you miss, Zariel shot back, her own eyes flaring gold, I'll let them cut your throat. The first assassin hit the ground, and for the first time in his immortal life, the Ruthless King hesitated. Chapter 2. 3 assassins lunged at once. The glowing chain between Vander and Zariel snapped taut. Vander moved to intercept, a lethal shadow tearing across the stone. But he forgot the tether. As he lunged forward, the magic chain hit its limit. Zariel was violently yanked off her feet, dragging Vander back by a fraction of an inch. It was enough for the lead assassin to strike. The hilt of a heavy iron blade slammed into Zariel's ribs. She gasped, dropping to her knees. 10 feet away, Vander staggered. He gripped his own side, an involuntary snarl ripping from his throat. The phantom pain radiated perfectly through the tether, sharp and undeniable. You weak, useless, Vander hissed, his golden eyes flashing with raw fury. Then don't let them hit me, Zariel shouted back, rolling out of the way of a descending spear. Stand up and fight, or I swear I will kill you myself. Vander grabbed the chain and pulled. Hard. Zariel was dragged across the dirt, sliding right against his broad, muscular back. Back to back, Vander ordered, his voice a low, commanding rumble. Move when I move. If you trip, we both die. Zariel didn't have time to argue. 8 more assassins circled them, their silver weapons glinting in the cavern's dim blue light. The fight that followed was a chaotic, brutal dance. They weren't a team. They were 2 enemies forced to survive the same nightmare. An assassin swept low at Zariel's legs. She vaulted upward, using the tension of the chain to swing herself around Vander's side. Vander ducked, letting her fly over him, before driving his elbow backward into an attacker's chest. The impact echoed through the cavern like a gunshot. The man crumpled, motionless. Left, Zariel screamed. Vander didn't hesitate. He pivoted, throwing a devastating punch that sent another assassin flying into the cavern wall. Zariel hissed, clutching her own shoulder as a burning sensation flared across her skin. The silver didn't just burn him, it burned her too. You let him cut you, she yelled over the chaos. Shut up and duck, Vander roared. He yanked the chain. Zariel dropped flat just as a wicked scythe swung where her neck had been a second before. Vander stepped over her, his aura exploding outward in a terrifying wave of alpha dominance. The sheer pressure of his presence forced the remaining 3 assassins to their knees. They couldn't breathe. They couldn't move. Without a word, Vander moved through them. A blur of motion, a sickening crunch of bone. In 3 seconds, the cavern fell dead silent. Zariel slowly pushed herself up from the dirt, panting heavily. The floor was littered with bodies. She looked at Vander. He wasn't looking at the dead. He was looking at her, and he was furious. Before Zariel could blink, Vander crossed the distance between them, his massive hand wrapped around her throat. He didn't squeeze enough to crush her windpipe, but the force was enough to lift her toes off the ground as he slammed her hard against a thick, ancient stone pillar. Vander, she choked out, her hands flying to his iron grip. I am a king, Vander growled. His face was inches from hers. The heat radiating off his body was suffocating. I command armies. I break empires. I do not share a leash with a rogue Omega. I didn't do this. She gasped, glaring back at him. I don't care, he snarled, his fangs fully extending. The golden fire in his eyes was blinding. I will not be tied to weakness. I will chop off your hand right now to get my freedom. He raised his free hand, his claws elongated, razor-sharp and ready to slice through her wrist. Zariel didn't scream. She didn't cry. The fear vanished, replaced by a sudden, icy defiance. Her hand shot down to the belt of a dead assassin at her feet. She pulled a silver hunting knife, but she didn't point it at Vander. She pressed the silver edge directly against her own carotid artery. Vanda froze. Do it, Zariel whispered, her voice deadly calm. A tiny bead of blood formed where the silver kissed her skin. "Cut my hand off, Alpha. Or better yet, let me do it. Let me end this right now." Vander's pupils dilated violently. "Let's see what happens," she challenged, staring right into his soul. "Let's see if the great King of Ironfang can survive when my heart stops beating." "Cut it." She pressed the blade a millimeter deeper. Don't let her die. Protect her. The instinct hit Vander like a physical blow. His inner wolf didn't just howl. It screamed in absolute panic. His chest tightened so hard he couldn't draw a breath. He physically could not watch her bleed. The alpha spark inside her was calling to the dominant predator inside him, forcing a sickeningly fierce need to shield her. His hand shook. Slowly, his grip on her throat loosened. He dropped his arm, stepping back as if her skin had burned him. "Drop the knife," he commanded. His voice wasn't a roar this time. It was a strained, dangerous rasp. Zariel lowered the blade, but she didn't drop it. She kept her chin high, her breathing ragged. She had won the standoff. The king had blinked, but her victory lasted less than a second. Without warning, the alpha spark buried in her chest violently flared. It collided with her omega biology in a brutal, biological explosion. Zariel dropped the knife. A searing, unnatural heat tore through her veins. "What?" she gasped, her knees buckling. She hit the stone floor, her entire body convulsing. Her skin flushed crimson. Sweat instantly beaded on her forehead. She couldn't breathe. The air in her lungs turned to fire. "Zariel?" Vander stepped forward, the anger in his eyes replaced by sharp confusion. Then, the scent hit him. It flooded the damp cavern. Crushed vanilla, wild jasmine, and something entirely, intoxicatingly sweet. It was the purest, most overwhelming omega pheromone Vander had ever encountered. It wasn't a natural occurrence. It was a forced, magical heat, triggered by the ancient power rejecting her fragile body. Through the glowing tether, the sensation violently transferred. Vander groaned, clutching his own chest as the unnatural lust slammed into him. His heart hammered against his ribs in a chaotic, desperate rhythm. The veins in his neck bulged. His golden eyes locked onto her trembling form on the ground. And this time, there was no murderous intent. There was only hunger, deep, primal, and entirely out of his control. "Vander." Zariel whimpered, curling into a ball as the heat consumed her. Her glazed eyes looked up at him, pleading for relief she didn't even understand. Vander took a step toward her. His fangs ached. His control was shattering like glass. They were miles underground, bound together. And the scent was driving him insane. Chapter 3. The winter wind was freezing, but Zariel was burning from the inside out. Vander carried her through the dense, snow-covered pines. He didn't carry her gently. She was slung over his shoulder like a sack of grain. His iron grip clamped around the backs of her thighs. Every step he took sent a jolt of fire through the glowing chain connecting their wrists. "Put me down," Zariel rasped, hitting his broad back with a weak fist. "You can't even stand," Vander grunted, his pace relentless. "I'd rather crawl in the snow than let you touch me." Vander stopped. He unceremoniously dumped her onto the frozen ground. Zariel hit the snow hard. She tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out. The magical fever ravaged her nervous system. She gasped, curling into herself as another wave of sickeningly sweet vanilla and wild jasmine exploded from her skin. Vander staggered back, covering his nose. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. "Stop doing that," he commanded, his voice thick with a dangerous, rough edge. "I'm not doing it on purpose," she cried out, her vision blurred. "The spark. It's fighting my blood. Your scent is choking me. It's making my wolf." Vander trailed off, his jaw snapping shut. He refused to admit out loud what the omega pheromones were doing to his mind. The tether pulsed violently, feeding her dizzying, desperate need straight into his veins. He cursed, a vicious string of words. He leaned down, scooped her up against his chest this time, and started running. 10 minutes later, A hidden wooden cabin appeared through the trees. Morwenna's sanctuary. Vander didn't knock. He kicked the heavy oak door off its hinges. The door crashed to the floor. Standing in the hallway with a cup of tea in his hand was a tall, lean man with sharp features and gray eyes. Beta Thane. Thane blinked at the broken door. Then, he looked at his king carrying a trembling, silver-haired girl. Instantly, Thane pinched his nose, waving his free hand in front of his face. "Goddess above," Thane coughed. "My king, with all due respect, you reek of desperate alpha from a mile away." "I thought a pack of rutting boars was storming the cabin." "Speak one more word, Thane, and I will wear your spine as a necklace," Vander snarled. Thane wisely shut his mouth, but his eyes darted to the glowing chain linking them. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question screaming in his head. "Where is the witch?" Vander demanded. "Morwenna is out gathering nightshade," Thane said, backing away from the overwhelming aura of the king. "She'll be back by dawn." "We don't have until dawn. Open the ice room. Now." Thane rushed down the hall and unlocked a heavy iron door. The room inside was tiny, meant for storing herbs and cooling fever-struck wolves. There was a single, narrow cot in the center. Vander walked in and dropped Zariel onto the cot. "Lock the door," Vander ordered Thane over his shoulder. Thane hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea? You look like you're going to eat her." "Lock it." The heavy iron door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked. They were alone. The room was freezing, but it didn't help. Zariel thrashed on the narrow cot. She was tearing at her own clothes, her breathing ragged and shallow. The fever was literally cooking her alive. Vander stood against the door, his hands balled into fists. He watched her suffer. He tried to look away, but the tether pulsed, sending a sharp, agonizing phantom pain straight into his own chest. She is dying. The realization hit him. The Omega biology couldn't handle the heat alone. She needed an alpha's cool, grounding touch to stabilize her core temperature, or her heart would give out. "I am a king," Vander whispered to himself, a final, desperate plea to his pride. "I do not lower myself for rogue trash." Zariel let out a broken sob, her back arching off the cot. Vander's pride shattered. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He climbed onto the narrow bed, trapping her between the wall and his massive frame. "Don't touch me!" Zariel shrieked, kicking wildly. "Stop fighting me!" Vander grabbed both of her wrists with one hand, pinning them above her head. With his other hand, he unbuttoned his heavy coat, throwing it to the floor. He pressed his chest firmly against hers. Zariel gasped. The contact was electric. His skin was unnaturally cold, a perfect, agonizing relief to her burning fever. "Breathe," Vander ordered, his face inches from hers. "Match my breathing. Slow your heart down." She couldn't. The forced proximity was driving her out of her mind. She hated him. He was the tyrant who wanted to kill her. But her body didn't care. Her Omega instincts recognized the overwhelming dominance of the Alpha holding her, and it demanded submission. "Vander," she whimpered, twisting beneath him. "I said stay still." He grit his teeth. Sweat dripped down his temple. Holding her like this, breathing in her undiluted scent, was pure torture. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to claim what was his. Then, Zariel completely lost her mind to the fever. She ripped her wrists out of his loosened grip. But she didn't push him away. Instead, her hands tangled violently into his dark hair, pulling him down. Before he could react, she tilted her head up and sank her teeth right into the side of his throat. Vander froze. It wasn't a lethal bite. It was a chaotic, instinctual, desperate nip over his pulse point. A pure claim of need. A low, terrifying growl vibrated in Vander's chest. The sound shook the walls of the tiny room. The last thread of his legendary self-control snapped. "You asked for this," he rasped. Vander flipped their positions. He pinned her flat against the mattress, his heavy body caging her completely. His golden eyes blazed with feral hunger. His fangs fully extended, grazing her collarbone. Zariel tilted her neck back, exposing her delicate scent gland. She wasn't fighting anymore. Vander opened his jaws, aiming straight for the fatal mark that would bind them forever. Crash. The thick glass of the room's high window shattered. Wood splintered. A black streak of metal tore through the air. Vander jerked back, a split second too late. A heavy, black-feathered arrow slammed deep into his right shoulder, pinning him against the wooden headboard. Vander roared, not in pain, but in sheer, bloodthirsty rage. He looked at the arrow. It was dripping with thick, dark purple venom. Corvin's signature poison. The enemy was here. Chapter 4. The poison acted instantly. Black veins crept up Vander's neck, pulsing with a toxic, sickly glow. He gripped the shaft of the arrow, his knuckles turning white, but before he could snap the wood, a sickening burning sensation tore through Zariel's shoulder. She screamed, collapsing onto the frozen floor. The pain sink. "Don't pull it!" A sharp voice barked from the doorway. A woman stood there, her wild, dark hair framing a face twisted in absolute annoyance. She carried a basket of crushed herbs and an unmistakable aura of authority. "Morwenna, I leave my cabin for one night, and the King of Ironfang turns my sanctuary into a bloodbath," Morwenna snapped, stepping over the broken door. She didn't bow. She didn't flinch at the terrifying alpha aura filling the room. Thane peeked in from behind her. "I tried to tell him, Morwenna." He wasn't in a listening mood. "Shut up, Thane," Vander growled. His chest heaved as the poison fought his accelerated healing. "Get this poison out of my blood, witch. Now." Morwenna dropped her basket. She walked up to the most dangerous man on the continent, grabbed the arrow, and ripped it out without counting to 3. Vander roared. Zariel gasped, biting her lip so hard it bled to keep from passing out. "Drink this," Morwenna ordered, shoving a vial of foul-smelling black liquid against Vander's lips. He swallowed it down, coughing as the burning in his veins slowly began to recede. Morwenna didn't stop there. She grabbed Vander's chained wrist, pulling it up to examine the glowing tether. Then, she looked at Zariel's matching cuff. A slow, chaotic smile spread across the healer's face. "Oh, the moon goddess has a twisted sense of humor," Morwenna laughed. It was a bright, mocking sound that made Vander's eyes flash with warning. "How do I break it?" Vander demanded, ignoring her amusement. "You don't." Morwenna let go of the chain and wiped her hands on her apron. "That is the soul tether. It's ancient weaver magic. It doesn't just bind your bodies. It binds your life forces. There is always a way to break a spell," Zariel said, her voice shaking as she pushed herself up against the wall. The fever had broken, leaving her exhausted and terrified. "There are 2 ways," Morwenna corrected, crossing her arms. "Way number 1, one of you dies. And since you share a nervous system, the survivor will likely go insane from the phantom pain. And the second?" Vander's voice was dangerously low. Morwenna leaned over the small table, slapping her hands flat against the wood. "A full, undeniable mating. A bite to the scent gland. A total claiming of body and soul. The magic will shatter once you are officially bonded." Silence fell over the room. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. "No." Zariel was the first to speak. She looked at Vander with pure disgust. "I am not an object. I will not be used to fix a magical glitch. You think I want this?" Vander sneered, turning his lethal gaze on her. "You are Corvin's leftover trash. You think a king mates with a rogue Omega to save his own life? Then cut off my arm!" Zariel yelled, stepping toward him. The chain clinked sharply. "Do it!" "I'd rather bleed out than spend another minute chained to a tyrant who views me as dirt." Vander's jaw tightened so hard his teeth threatened to crack. He stepped into her space, towering over her. "Do not tempt me, little wolf." "Enough!" Morwenna slammed a heavy mortar onto the table, the loud crack cutting through their shouting match. She rolled her eyes, pointing an accusing finger at both of them. "Listen to me, you stubborn fools. You are practically suffocating everyone in this forest with your unresolved tension. If you two don't mate and break this chain soon, I will personally bolt you to that bed. Your pheromones are rotting my drying herbs in the other room. Vander glared at the healer, ready to threaten her life. But a low rumble beneath their feet stopped him. The wooden floorboards vibrated. Dust drifted down from the ceiling rafters. Thane burst into the room, his sarcastic demeanor completely gone. His face was pale. "We have a problem," Thane said, drawing his sword. A bone-chilling howl ripped through the night outside. It wasn't one wolf. It was hundreds. Vander grabbed Zariel by the chain and dragged her behind him as he marched out of the room and kicked the front door open. The clearing was surrounded. Glowing eyes pierced the darkness between the trees. At the front of the massive pack stood a wolf the size of a bear, its fur pitch black. The wolf shifted, bones cracking and reshaping until a tall, scarred man stood in the snow. Corvan, Zariel's former alpha. The man who had made her life a living hell. "Vander." Corvan's voice boomed, dripping with toxic arrogance. "You stepped into my territory. You stole my property. Nothing belongs to you, Corvan," Vander shouted back, stepping onto the porch. His golden eyes locked onto his half-brother. "You were banished. Step onto my land, and I will rip your throat out." "I didn't come for your throne," Corvan sneered, his eyes shifting to Zariel, who was standing frozen behind Vander's massive shoulder. "I came for the girl. She is chained to me," Vander stated, a terrifying possessiveness leaking into his tone, even though he tried to suppress it. "If you want her, you have to go through me." Corvan threw his head back and laughed. It was an ugly, grating sound. "You don't even know what you're protecting, do you?" Corvan mocked. He addressed the hundreds of wolves surrounding the cabin, his voice amplifying with alpha command. "Look at her, the girl hiding behind the King of Ironfang. She isn't just a rogue. She isn't just a weak Omega." Corvan pointed a deadly finger straight at Zariel. "She is the Moonweaver. She carries the ancient bloodline that can sever pack links. She is a walking disease that will destroy our hierarchy, make us weak, and tear our world apart." Gasps and angry snarls erupted from the surrounding pack. Zariel stopped breathing. The secret she had buried, the reason she had been hunted her entire life, was just laid bare for the entire world to see. Vander turned his head slowly, looking down at Zariel. The absolute betrayal in his golden eyes was devastating. "A weaver," Vander whispered. "Hand her over, brother." Corvan roared, his men stepping closer. "Or we will burn this forest down with all of you inside." Chapter 5. A weaver. The word left Vander's lips like a curse. He turned his head slowly. His golden eyes, which just moments ago had burned with a primal need to protect her, were now freezing over with absolute, terrifying realization. To a normal wolf, a moonweaver was a myth. To an alpha king, she was the ultimate executioner. A weaver could sever the sacred pack bonds. She could strip an alpha of his power, reducing his empire to dust with a single thought. "You lied to me," Vander said. His voice wasn't a roar. It was a deadly, quiet whisper that cut through the howling wind. "I didn't lie." Zariel stepped back, but the chain pulled taut. "I didn't know what I was until my pack started dying around me. I never asked for this blood. You carry the poison that kills kings." Vander gripped the glowing chain, his knuckles turned white. "You are the very thing I am sworn to destroy." "Then kill me," Zariel screamed, tears of frustration finally breaking through. "Do it! Break the chain and let Corvan take my corpse." Before Vander could answer, the tree line exploded. "Take them," Corvan roared. Dozens of massive wolves lunged from the shadows. The ground shook. "Defend the cabin!" Morwenna shouted from the doorway, her hands glowing with bright, blinding green magic. She threw a barrage of explosive energy into the front lines, sending 3 wolves flying into the snow. Thane leaped off the porch, shifting midair. His gray wolf form hit the ground running, tearing into Corvan's vanguard with lethal precision. Vander didn't shift. He didn't need to. An enemy wolf leaped at his throat. Vander caught the beast by the jaw and slammed it into the frozen earth with enough force to crack the bedrock. He spun, using the momentum to hurl another attacker into a tree. "Stay behind me," Vander ordered Zariel, pulling the tether. "You just said you wanted to destroy me," she yelled, ducking as a stray claw swiped at her head. "I said stay behind me," he roared back, his eyes flashing brilliant gold. He backhanded a charging rogue, sending the man tumbling into the dirt. It was absolute chaos. Zariel fought desperately, using every ounce of agility she had. But she wasn't a warrior. She was an Omega. Exhausted and terrified. From the edge of the clearing, Corvan watched the slaughter. He realized Vander was too strong. Direct combat wouldn't work. He needed to break the king from the inside. Corvan pulled a jagged, obsidian amulet from his coat. Dark, suffocating purple smoke bled from the stone. "Let's see how much the king cares about his new pet," Corvan sneered. He crushed the amulet in his fist. A violent streak of purple lightning shot across the clearing. It didn't aim for Vander. It aimed straight for Zariel. The dark magic slammed into her chest. Zariel gasped. Her feet left the ground. The purple smoke wrapped around her throat like a serpent, invading her eyes, her nose, her mind. It wasn't physical pain. It was pure, unadulterated, psychological torture. Corvan's voice echoed directly inside her skull. "You are nothing. You are a mistake. Suffer." Zariel let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed into the snow. 30 feet away, Vander was mid-swing, his fist about to crush a rogue's jaw. Suddenly, he froze. The pain sink didn't just transfer physical wounds. It transferred everything. The sheer magnitude of Zariel's absolute terror, her crushing despair, and her agonizing mental breakdown slammed into Vander through the glowing tether. It hit him like a freight train. Vander dropped to his knees. He grabbed his chest, his eyes widening in pure shock. He coughed violently, dark blood splattering onto the pristine snow. He couldn't breathe. The sorrow invading his mind was so heavy, so completely devastating. It brought the indestructible King of Ironfang to the ground. "Vander!" Thane yelled, seeing his alpha fall. 2 enemy wolves saw the opening. They lunged at the kneeling king. They didn't make it. Vander's head snapped up. His eyes were no longer human. They weren't even alpha gold. They were entirely, terrifyingly black. The king had gone feral. The emotional overload had shattered his human consciousness, leaving only the ancient, bloodthirsty beast behind. He didn't feel pain anymore. He only felt the overwhelming, desperate need to stop whatever was hurting his mate. Vander rose to his feet. The air pressure in the clearing dropped so fast that several wolves whimpered and backed away. "Mine," Vander growled. He moved. It wasn't fighting. It was an execution. He tore through Corvan's pack like a dark god of war. He didn't use weapons. He used brute, crushing force. Bodies were thrown like rag dolls. Impacts echoed like thunderclaps. He didn't care about defending himself. He let their claws graze his skin, marching forward in a straight, bloody line toward Zariel. "Stop him!" Corvan panicked, backing away as his men were decimated. "Use the girl! Use the Weaver!" Corvan chanted desperately, channeling every ounce of his dark magic into the broken Omega on the ground. Through the haze of slaughter, Vander reached the end of the chain. He fell to his knees beside Zariel, his massive hands reaching out to pull her from the dark magic wrapping around her body. "Zariel," Vander rasped, his voice tearing as his human consciousness fought to regain control. "Look at me. I'm here." Zariel stopped screaming. The purple smoke fully absorbed into her skin. The clearing went dead silent. Slowly, Zariel stood up. Vander reached for her face. But as she looked down at him, his heart stopped. Her beautiful eyes were gone, replaced by a deep, hollow, pitch-black void. Her face was entirely void of emotion. She was completely under Corvan's control. A puppet. "Kill the Alpha," Corvan commanded from the shadows. Zariel didn't hesitate. She raised her hand, her nails elongated into razor-sharp claws, dripping with Corvan's dark, lethal venom. Vander looked up at her. He didn't raise his hands to defend himself. He didn't pull away. Without a sound, Zariel swung her arm down, driving her venomous claws straight toward Vander's heart. Chapter 6. The venomous claws descended. Vander didn't dodge. He didn't block. He simply retracted his own claws and opened his arms. Thwack. Zariel's hand plunged into his left shoulder, driving deep into the muscle just inches above his heart. The dark venom instantly sizzled against his skin. Yes. Corvan's deranged laughter echoed across the bloody snow. Tear his heart out. Show the world how weak a mate makes a king. Vander didn't look at his brother. He didn't look at the blood soaking his dark shirt. He only looked at Zariel. Her pitch-black eyes stared back, empty and cold. She raised her other hand to deliver the killing blow. Vander fell to one knee. Not from weakness, but from absolute surrender. He reached up, but not to strike her. He gently wrapped his massive hand around her wrist, the same wrist chained to him, the same hand buried in his shoulder. "Do it," Vander whispered. His voice was a raw, bleeding rasp. Zariel's hand trembled. The dark magic forced her to push deeper, but something else, something warm and terrifyingly bright, was fighting back. Vander gripped the glowing chain. He didn't pull it to cause pain. Instead, he poured every ounce of his soul, his memories, and his unbending devotion straight into the tether. "I am the king of 1,000 wolves," Vander growled, the golden fire in his eyes piercing her hollow stare. "I bow to no one." But tonight, he leaned closer, pulling her hand deeper into his own wound. He didn't care. "Tonight, I am just your servant. Wake up, my queen." The words hit her like a physical shockwave. The soul tether exploded with blinding, pure silver light. The pulse shot straight up Zariel's arm, shattering the dark purple venom in her veins like brittle glass. Zariel gasped, her back arching violently. The black void vanished from her eyes, replaced by a radiant, furious gold. She blinked, her vision clearing. She saw her hand covered in Vander's blood. She saw the invincible king kneeling in the snow, sacrificing his pride and his life just to bring her back. "Vander," she choked out, ripping her hand back as if the blood had burned her. "I've got you," he breathed, catching her before she could collapse. "Kill them both!" Corvan shrieked in absolute panic, realizing his control was broken. Zariel spun around. She didn't cower. She didn't run. The terrified Omega was dead. The Moonweaver woke up. "You made me hurt him," Zariel whispered. She raised both hands. The air in the clearing instantly vanished. A massive, soundless shockwave of pure silver energy erupted from her chest. It wasn't physical force. It was a severing of souls. Every wolf loyal to Corvan dropped to the ground, howling in agony as their pack bonds were violently ripped apart. Corvan was thrown backward, crashing through a thick pine tree, blood pouring from his nose. The earth beneath them groaned. The immense release of Weaver magic shattered the frozen bedrock. A massive fissure cracked open directly beneath Zariel and Vander's feet. Vander didn't hesitate. He grabbed her by the waist and pulled her against his chest as the ground gave way. They fell into the crushing darkness, sliding down a steep, rocky chute deep into the mountain's belly. They hit the floor of an ancient, enclosed cavern. Vander rolled, taking the brunt of the impact. He lay still for a second, breathing heavily in the dark. "Are you okay?" Zariel scrambled off him, her hands hovering over his bleeding shoulder. "I stabbed you. The poison is burning out." Vander cut her off. His voice was different now. Darker. Heavier. The immediate danger was gone. But the air in the small cave suddenly became impossibly thick. Zariel felt it. The heat. It didn't just return. It crashed into her like a tidal wave. The Weaver magic had completely exhausted her defenses, leaving the alpha spark inside her unchecked. Her breath hitched. The overwhelming scent of crushed vanilla and wild jasmine flooded the enclosed space. Vander slowly stood up. In the dim light of the glowing tether, his golden eyes locked onto her. The feral hunger was back, and this time, he wasn't fighting it. He took a slow step forward. Zariel took a step back. Her back hit the cold stone wall. There was nowhere left to run. Vander planted both hands on the rock on either side of her head, caging her entirely. His massive chest brushed against hers. His fangs fully descended, gleaming in the dark. "Vander," she breathed, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. He lowered his head. His lips hovered mere millimeters from her neck. The heat radiating off him was intoxicating, overpowering her senses completely. "If you don't ask me to stop right now," Vander rasped, his voice a lethal, possessive vibration against her collarbone, "I am going to bite you, and I will keep you locked by my side for the rest of our immortal lives." Zariel looked up into his burning eyes. She didn't push him away. Chapter 7. Zariel didn't push him away. Instead, her hands curled into the fabric of his torn shirt. She pulled him closer. "I'm not asking you to stop," she whispered. The last thread of Vander's legendary control snapped. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask again. He buried his face in the crook of her neck. His sharp fangs grazed her pulse point, feeling the frantic, desperate beat of her heart. The scent of vanilla and wild jasmine was completely suffocating, drowning out the cold, the blood, and the dark cavern around them. Vander wrapped his massive arms tightly around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. "Mine," Vander rumbled. It was a vow. A claim. He sank his fangs deep into her scent gland. Zariel gasped, her back arching violently. But it wasn't pain. It was an explosion of pure, blinding heat. The alpha spark inside her recognized its true master. The weaver magic in her veins welcomed the dominant force of the king. Their souls slammed together, fusing in a rush of brilliant, breathless energy. Between them, the glowing soul tether flared white-hot. Then, it shattered. The magical chain broke into a million pieces of silver starlight, raining down around them like snow before vanishing into the dark. The phantom pain was gone. The forced connection was dead. What remained was a real, unbreakable, true mate bond. Vander slowly pulled back. His chest heaved. The feral darkness in his eyes was replaced by a deep, molten gold. He brushed a stray silver curl from her face, his thumb tracing the fresh, permanent crescent mark on her neck. "You are my queen," Vander swore, his voice trembling with an emotion he had never felt before. "Nothing will ever touch you again." Zariel looked at him, her breathing ragged but steady. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. But the silence didn't last. A high-pitched scream echoed down the rocky chute they had fallen through. Vander's head snapped up. It was Morwenna's voice, magically amplified to reach deep into the mountain. "Vander, Death Canyon, he has us!" The romantic tension instantly evaporated, replaced by lethal focus. Vander grabbed Zariel's hand. Not because of a chain, but because he refused to let her go. "Can you run?" he asked. "Try to keep up," Zariel shot back. They scaled the cavern wall, following the draft of fresh air that led to a narrow, hidden exit. When they burst through the rocks, the freezing wind hit them instantly. They stood at the edge of Death Canyon, a massive, jagged rift in the earth, surrounded by dead trees and steep drops. At the edge of the cliff stood Corvin. He looked entirely unhinged. His clothes were torn, his eyes bloodshot, and dark purple veins bulged on his neck. In front of him, Beta Thane and Morwenna were forced onto their knees. Two massive rebel wolves held silver blades to their throats. "Look who survived the fall!" Corvin mocked, his voice echoing across the canyon. "The king and his little pet." Vander stepped forward. The aura he radiated now wasn't just alpha dominance. It was the terrifying, limitless power of a mated king. The ground beneath his boots literally cracked. "Let them go, Corvin," Vander ordered. This is between you and me. Wrong. Corvin spat. He grabbed Morwenna's hair, yanking her head back. She winced but glared at him with pure hatred. This is about the throne. This is about the world. You mated a weaver. Vander. You mated the enemy of our kind. She is your queen, Vander roared, his voice shaking the barren trees. And you will bow to her, or I will mount your head on my gates. I bow to no one, Corvan screamed. He raised his free hand. A swirling sphere of absolute, pitch-black energy began to form in his palm. The Void Sphere. A forbidden, suicidal magic that consumed everything it touched. If I can't rule this empire, I will turn it to ash. Kill the hostages. The two rebel wolves raised their blades. No! Zariel shouted. She didn't wait for Vander. She stepped in front of the king. Her eyes flared with blinding silver light. The crescent mark on her neck pulsed with Vander's alpha energy, amplifying her weaver magic 100-fold. You think bonds make us weak, Corvan? Zariel's voice didn't just echo, it vibrated in the minds of every wolf present. Let's see how strong your men are without them. Zariel slammed both hands onto the rocky ground. A wave of pure, silver fire erupted from her palms. It shot across the canyon, bypassing Thane and Morwenna completely, and slammed into the rebel wolves. The effect was instantaneous. The two wolves holding the blades dropped their weapons. They collapsed to the dirt, screaming, clutching their chests as their connection to Corvin's pack was violently, permanently erased. They were reduced to hollow, powerless rogues in a matter of seconds. Corvin staggered back. His pack link was gone. His army was broken. He looked at Zariel in sheer, unmatched terror. She had dismantled his entire rebellion without shedding a single drop of blood. You monster, Corvin gasped. It's over, Zariel said, her chest heaving as the magic drained her. Not yet, Corvin shrieked. Pure madness took over. He didn't aim for Zariel. He knew he couldn't beat her magic. Instead, he locked eyes with Vander, who was rushing forward to pull Thane and Morwenna away from the cliff's edge. Corvin hurled the void sphere straight at Vander's exposed back. The black orb tore through the air, screaming like a dying animal. It devoured the light around it, a projectile of absolute destruction. Vander heard the sound. He turned, but he was too far. He couldn't dodge in time. Vander, Zariel moved. She didn't think. She just acted on the pure, devastating instinct of a true mate. She threw herself directly into the path of the black orb. Zariel, no! Vander roared. The void sphere hit her squarely in the chest. There was no explosion, no blood, no sound at all. The black magic instantly absorbed into her body, clashing violently with her silver weaver energy. Zariel stopped midair. Her eyes widened. She hit the ground, rolling to a stop just inches from the cliff's edge. Vander crossed the distance in a fraction of a second. He dropped to his knees, his hands reaching out to pull her into his arms. I've got you. You're okay. I've got you. Vander choked out, panic completely shattering his voice, but as his hands grabbed her shoulders, they phased right through her. Vander froze. He stared at his empty hands in horror. Zariel wasn't bleeding. She was glowing. Her skin, her hair, her clothes, everything was slowly turning translucent, dissolving into tiny, floating specks of silver light. The void sphere was erasing her physical form. Vander, Zariel whispered. Her voice sounded far away, like an echo. She looked down at her fading hands. She didn't look scared. She looked profoundly sad. No, 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 no. Vander tried to grab her face, but his fingers slipped through light. Stop. Stop it. Morwenna, fix her. Morwenna ran over, her face pale with shock. She raised her hands to cast a healing spell, but the green magic just passed right through Zariel's fading body. I can't. The void. It's taking her soul. You can't leave me, Vander begged. The ruthless king, the monster who made continents tremble, was openly sobbing. He hovered his hands over her, trying to catch the light, trying to hold her together by sheer willpower. "We just broke the chain. You promised me." Zariel looked up into his broken, golden eyes. She managed a weak, transparent smile. "I didn't need the chain, Vander," she whispered. "I was already yours." With a soft, rushing sound like wind through the trees, the rest of her body shattered into millions of silver particles. They floated upward, carried away by the cold wind. Zariel was gone. Vander remained kneeling in the dirt, his hands clutching nothing but the freezing air. Behind him, Corvin started to laugh. Chapter 8. The silver particles drifted upward, catching the moonlight before fading into the cold, unforgiving dark. Zariel was gone. Vander didn't move. He remained on his knees in the dirt, his hands frozen in the exact position they had been when she slipped through his fingers. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. The silence radiating from the King of Ironfang was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. It was the silence of a dead world. Behind him, a harsh, grating sound broke the stillness. Corvin was laughing. "I told you!" Corvin spat blood onto the rocks, clutching his ribs as he stood up. "I told you the bonds make us weak. You gave her your power, and she wasted it dying for you. She was nothing, a pathetic omega who couldn't even survive." "Thane," Vander said. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. Flat. Dead. Thane stepped forward, his sword drawn, his face pale. "My king, turn Morwenna around. Do not let her look." Thane immediately grabbed the witch by the shoulders and spun her away from the cliff. Vander stood up. He didn't turn around immediately. He slowly lowered his hands. The crescent mark on his neck, the fresh mating bite, pulsed with a searing, phantom agony. His mate was gone, but the bond refused to die. Slowly, the Alpha King turned to face his brother. Corvin's laughter died instantly in his throat. Vander's eyes weren't gold. They weren't black. They were burning with a blinding, apocalyptic silver, the residual weaver magic of his lost queen, fueled by his bottomless rage. "You think you won," Vander whispered. The sound carried across the canyon like a death sentence. "She's gone, Vander," Corvin yelled, stumbling backward. The sheer, suffocating pressure of Vander's aura was crushing his lungs. "The Weaver is dead. The throne is secure. There is no throne without her." Vander crossed the distance in a single, blurring stride. Corvin raised his hands to cast a spell, to fight, to do anything. He was too slow. Vander didn't use his claws. He didn't use magic. He reached out and grabbed Corvin by the throat, lifting the massive alpha off the ground with one hand. "She was my heart," Vander stated, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that shook the canyon walls. "And you just stopped it from beating." "Brother, wait," Corvin choked out, terror finally breaking through his madness. "You are no brother of mine." Vander slammed him down against the bedrock. The impact echoed like a thunderclap across the canyon. The ground cracked beneath them. Corvin's body went completely still. The rebellion was over. The traitor was dead. But Vander didn't feel the catharsis of victory. He dropped Corvin's lifeless body and turned back to the edge of the cliff. He fell back to his knees right where Zariel had vanished. The cold wind howled around him, empty and mocking. "No!" Vander rasped, his voice finally breaking. The invincible king trembled. "No. I reject this." He looked up at the sky. The full moon hung heavy and bright, an indifferent witness to his agony. "Do you hear me?" Vander roared at the sky. The sound was devastating, a raw, bleeding scream that tore from the very depths of his soul. "You gave her to me. You forced the chain. You made me love her." The wind blew harder, but the sky remained silent. "She fixed your broken world," Vander yelled, tears of pure grief tracking down his face. "She saved this pack. She saved me. You do not get to take her." "Vander, please," Morwenna cried softly from behind him. The void magic. It's final. She is with the goddess now. Then I will go to the goddess and drag her back myself. Vander raised his hands, his razor-sharp claws fully extended, gleaming in the moonlight. He pressed the deadly tips directly against the center of his own chest, right over his beating heart. Thane gasped, dropping his sword. Vander, stop! What are you doing? An exchange, Vander growled, his eyes fixed on the moon. A king's heart for a queen's soul. Blood for light. He didn't hesitate. He drove his claws inward, piercing his own flesh. Take it! Vander screamed at the heavens. Take my life and give hers back. Before he could push deeper, before he could tear his own heart from his chest, the world stopped. The wind died instantly. The howling of the wolves vanished. The clouds parted with violent speed, and a beam of pure, concentrated moonlight slammed into the canyon floor directly in front of Vander. The light was blinding. The sheer divine pressure forced Thane and Morwenna to their knees, their faces pressed to the dirt. Vander didn't bow. He kept his bloody hand over his chest, his golden eyes glaring into the blinding column of light. A king who kneels for an omega, a voice echoed. It didn't come from the air. It vibrated in the marrow of their bones. It was ancient, infinite, and terrifyingly calm. A king who offers his own heart to break the rules of death. Give her back, Vander demanded, blood dripping down his chin. He was threatening a god. The void consumes all, the goddess spoke. But a true mate bond, sealed with sacrifice, is heavier than the void. Inside the pillar of light, the floating silver particles that had vanished into the sky suddenly began to rain backward. They swirled, twisting like a galaxy coming to life. The Weaver magic and the Alpha spark collided in a storm of brilliant, explosive energy. Flesh wove itself from starlight, bone crystallized from the ether. The light flared one final, blinding time, and then shattered like glass. Zariel stood in the center of the crater. She wasn't transparent anymore. She was completely, undeniably real. Her silver hair practically glowed, and upon her forehead rested a faint, shimmering diadem of pure moonlight, the mark of the Moon Queen. She opened her eyes. They weren't the terrified eyes of a hunted rogue. They were the radiant, powerful eyes of a sovereign. Vander stopped breathing. Zariel, he whispered. She looked down at him. She saw him kneeling in the dirt, his chest bleeding, his face stained with tears and desperation. You idiot, Zariel whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She stepped forward, falling to her knees right in front of him. You were going to rip your own heart out? It wasn't beating without you anyway, Vander rasped. He didn't wait another second. He threw his arms around her, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled sharply, filling his lungs with the scent of vanilla and wild jasmine. She was warm. She was solid. She was alive. Zariel wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, holding the trembling king tightly against her. I'm here, she promised, pressing a kiss to his temple. I'm not going anywhere. A respectful, stunned silence blanketed the canyon. The surviving wolves of Corvin's pack, those who had lost their link but witnessed the miracle, slowly began to approach. They looked at the dead traitor. Then, they looked at the glowing Omega, who had defeated death. One by one, they dropped to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the earth. Not out of fear, but out of absolute reverence. Thane picked up his sword, sheathing it with a loud, metallic clack that broke the tension. He walked over, dusting off his coat. Well, Thane muttered, crossing his arms and looking at the two of them clutching each other in the dirt. I suppose congratulations are in order. And for the record, goddess be praised. I finally don't have to smell his unsatisfied feral alpha scent anymore. It was giving me a migraine. Morwenna smacked the back of Thane's head. Ruin the moment, why don't you? Zariel let out a watery laugh. Vander pulled back just enough to look at her face. The feral darkness was completely gone from him, leaving only a fierce, unyielding devotion. Without breaking eye contact, Vander stood up. He didn't let her walk. He scooped her seamlessly into his arms, carrying her against his chest as easily as if she weighed nothing. "Put me down, Vander. I can walk," Zariel protested, though she looped her arms securely around his neck. "Never," Vander said flatly. He turned to face the kneeling wolves. His voice boomed across the canyon, carrying the weight of an unbroken king and his immortal queen. "Hear me," Vander roared. "This is Zariel, the Moonweaver, the survivor of the Abyss, and the undisputed Queen of Ironfang. Anyone who disrespects her name will answer to my claws." As one, every single wolf in the canyon threw their heads back. A massive, unified howl erupted into the night sky, a primal oath of loyalty to the king and the weaver who saved them all. Vander looked down at Zariel. The glowing mating mark on her neck pulsed in perfect rhythm with his own. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a deep, possessing kiss. It wasn't rushed. It was a seal of absolute victory. When he finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, a slow, breathtaking smile broke across the king's face. "Even the gods," Vander whispered, his golden eyes burning with infinite love, "cannot take you from me."